Okay, let's dive into one of modern India's most significant legal battles. We're talking about a case that pitted centuries of religious tradition right up against the core principles of a modern constitution. It was a real showdown. And really, it all boiled down to this one huge question. Can an ancient religious custom actually override a fundamental right to equality? That's what India's Supreme Court had to figure out in the landmark Sabrimala temple case. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the ancient rule itself. Then, we'll get into the arguments on both sides, the fight for equality and the defense of tradition. After that, we'll unpack the Supreme Court's final verdict, and finally, talk about why this whole thing matters so much. All right, first things first. To really get what this conflict is about, you have to understand the temple. At the very heart of the Sabrimala shrine in Kerala is the deity Lord Ayappa. Now, he is worshipped as a Naishtika brahmachari, which means he's taken a vow of lifelong celibacy. And this one belief, well, it's the key to the entire controversy. So, because of that vow of celibacy, a custom developed over hundreds of years. It barred women in their menstruating years, so we're generally talking about ages 10 to 50, from even entering the temple. The core belief was that their presence could, disturb the deity's celibacy. Now, you can probably guess this centuries-old custom didn't go unchallenged. It was taken straight to court, so let's take a look at the case that was made for equality. The petitioner's argument was pretty straightforward. They said this ban was just plain discrimination. They argued that it treated women's biology as some kind of pollution, which, directly violates their constitutional rights to equality, freedom from discrimination, and get this, even their own individual right to practice their religion. And the Chief Justice at the time really hit the nail on the head. He said, patriarchy in religion cannot be permitted to trump devotion. The idea was simple, really. When a religious practice is discriminatory, the Constitution has to win. That's the bottom line. But of course, there are two sides to every story. The temple's defenders came back with a really powerful case of their own, one that was rooted in tradition and, interestingly, a different set of constitutional rights. They said, look, this isn't about gender. For them, it was all about respecting the unique nature of the deity and the incredibly rigorous 41-day penance that's required for the pilgrimage. They claimed this practice was actually protected under Article 26 of the Constitution, which gives religious groups the right to manage their own affairs. And this slide, wow, it just lays out the central conflict perfectly. You've got two fundamental rights clashing head to head. On one side, the individual's right to worship under Article 25. On the other, the group's right to manage its religious affairs under Article 26. So, which one gives? All right, so this is the moment of truth. With two fundamental rights in direct conflict, how in the world did the Supreme Court navigate this? Let's break down exactly how they picked apart the traditionalist argument to reach their verdict. The court's first move was to tackle that claim about the temple having a group right to manage its affairs. And to do that, they had to answer a really critical legal question. Are the followers of Lord Ayappa a distinct religious denomination? And the court's answer was a firm no. It ruled that Ayappa devotees are part of the broader Hindu faith, not some separate group with their own unique rules. And wow, that was a huge blow to the temple's defense. It basically meant that the special protection for group rights under Article 26, well, it just didn't apply here. So, with that group rights argument off the table, the court moved on to its next big test. They asked, is excluding women an essential religious practice? In other words, is this practice so fundamental to Hinduism that the religion itself would be totally altered without it? And what they found was, not really. There was no basis for it in the main scriptures, and they even noted that the practice hadn't always been consistently applied over the years. There was evidence that women had entered the temple before for certain ceremonies. So, conclusion, not essential. And that led the court to its final reasoning. First, they said the practice was an affront to women's dignity. But crucially, they argued that religious customs have to yield to something they called constitutional morality. Now, that's not about public opinion. It's about the core values of equality and liberty that are baked right into the Constitution itself. So, on September 28, 2018, the gavel finally came down. The verdict was delivered with a decisive 4-1 majority, and the rule that had formalized the ban was officially struck down. Okay, so the verdict was in.
But what's the lasting impact of this historic judgment? I mean, why does it still matter so much today?
Well, the big thing is, this verdict established a really powerful precedent. It affirmed that constitutional principles, like equality and individual dignity, they apply even inside sacred spaces. It sent a super clear message. Tradition does not get to stand above the Constitution. But the ruling leaves us with this profound question, doesn't it? It just highlights this ongoing and often really difficult conversation about how a modern secular country is supposed to engage with ancient religious traditions. And that's a conversation that continues to shape societies, not just in India, but all over the world.